I have to come back, Mr. Walker. You mentioned that you were underfunded. And my constituents, I can't walk down the street without someone asking me about the $12 billion that was flown over of Iraqi money, and of which $8.8 billion is unaccounted for. That's the official term. Unaccounted for means missing, gone. And I know that it's been looked at, but I can't get it out of my mind, and my constituents can't get it out of their mind, that if we had been better stewards of the Iraqi money in the Reconstruction, then we wouldn't be spending our American money on the Iraqi Reconstruction. And I want to ask Mr. Bowen, Mr. Reed, Mr. Walker, if you have any insight on what happened to that $8.8 billion, and you say we should be more accountable. Can you help us in figuring out how to be more accountable on that $8.8 billion that, dissolved into ether or whatever? And I just very frustrated if you could give us some stronger markers for the administration. They say they're weapons of mass destruction. We can't find the weapons of mass destruction. They say give us a surge. We give them a surge. It doesn't work. We've given them 4 increases in troops, and it hasn't worked. Can you think of any guidelines or oversight that might get the Department of Defense to have standards by which they will agree that after a certain amount of misleading and failure, that they will begin to step down and ask the Iraqis to step up and take responsibility for their own country? Anyway, Mr. Walker.
I'll start. First, as you know, I had a son who was a Marine Corps officer who fought in Iraq, and so I've not only been working on this in my responsibilities as Comptroller General and GAO's responsibilities. I obviously have an interest, given that I have a son that fought over there, although he's out now. Secondly, we did do a lot of work in support of the Iraqi study group. I was one of the first witnesses before the Iraq study group. We gave them all of our reports and made access to all of our people there. Thirdly, one of the things that we've recommended a long time ago to both the executive branch and the Congress is that you need to have more metrics and milestones, both for what the U.S. is supposed to do and trying to accomplish and what the Iraqis are supposed to do and trying to accomplish. If you don't have appropriate metrics and milestones, and if you don't have adequate transparency over those metrics and milestones, you don't have any idea whether you're making progress or not. And you can't make informed decisions. Part of that's why you need the TRAs, but it needs to go not just with regard to Iraqi security forces. It has to deal with some of the other issues that have been talked about here: electricity, water, a variety of other factors, oil production, for example. And so there need to be more metrics and milestones, and you need to be able to have somebody like GAO and others in the accountability community to assess the reliability of the information that you're being provided, the old trust but verify approach.
Thank you. Mr. Bowen?
As we addressed last week, the CPA did not follow either its mandate required under the UN Security Council Resolution 1483 or its own rules in managing the development fund for Iraq, and thus the Iraqi ministries distributed that money, used that money, spent that money without any accountability back to CPA as to how it was used. The Board of Supreme Audit continues to look at that issue. I work with GAO to provide. I've worked with GAO to provide the documents to the President of the Board of Supreme Audit so he can complete his audit. The audits that were completed by other entities employed by the UN looking at this issue found a lack of controls within the ministries and thus no accountability. And finally, the Commission on Public Integrity, the law enforcement arm in Iraq, ironically created by the CPA, has hundreds of fraud cases ongoing with respect to what happened to that money. So it's not a good story, and as our audit reported almost 2 years ago.
Mr. Reed, do you want to respond?
I defer to Mr. Walker and Mr. Bowen and the good work they're doing in this area. It doesn't fall, of course, as a contract audit issue, but as a private citizen, I share your concerns equally.
If I may, real quick, Mr. Waxman. As your constituent, as you know, and hopefully your constituents do, the $9 billion roughly is Iraqi money. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be concerned about it. We had a fiduciary responsibility with regard to that money, and that should be taken very seriously. We are, in part, going to be viewed as being responsible and accountable as to whether or not those funds were used properly and for appropriate purposes and with positive outcomes, irrespective of whose money it was. And now we need to make sure that the legitimate institutions of the Iraqi government, namely the Board of Supreme Audit, has access and cooperation in order to conduct their audits of what happened with that money. And I and Stuart Bowen are trying to make sure that that happens, but there are varying degrees of cooperation that are occurring there. I mean, I found out recently, for example, that my counterpart, his home was entered into by our Army. All of the weapons were confiscated. No explanation, no apology. His predecessor was assassinated. Job's a pretty tough job. You know, not everybody's for transparency and accountability. Fortunately, in this country, you know, people debate about it rather than resort to violence. But
Thank you, Ms. Maloney. Mr. Bowen, just before I call on Mr. Clay, clarification. Last week, when you were here with Ambassador Bremer, it seemed to me that both of you agreed there was no fraud. But now you're telling us that there's a fraud investigation by the Iraqis.
Right.
So there certainly appears to have been fraud by the Iraqis in the use of that cash. Right. Is that correct?
What I said was that our audit made no findings of any fraud with respect to the disbursement of that audit. What I said today is that the CPI commissioner reports to me when I go visit with him that he has ongoing cases with respect to allegations of fraud, and I think I said that last week as well, on the use of that money.
CPI?
Commission on Public Integrity. It's the Iraqi FBI.
Okay. Thank you.